Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I will speak in English because I don't speak Spanish at all. But I could understand some of the things that Claudia said. She said a lot, so it made my task very easy. What I propose you is that we will do a sort of tour of what we call advanced economies these days, but I don't know if they are so much advanced. We'll first look at our general view and our general forecast, then we will look at the US, and then we'll make a focus on the sovereign debt crisis. And also, I think it's a good time also to think about country risk and how far country risk has been affected by the sovereign risk. I think it's a huge revolution for us, what's happening in Europe right now, and I will tell a little more about it. So what is country risk for Coface first? I want to make sure that you remember that we don't rate sovereign debt in Coface, we really rate corporates, and because it's our day-to-day business, and we look at the way corporates will pay their debt. So for us, country risk is the way countries' growth, financial crisis, banking, interest rates, or exchange rate will affect the way corporate will pay the debt. So it's not sovereign. And we have 7 grades, A1, A2, A3, A4 for, let's say, lower risks, and BCD for higher risks. And this rating is 10 years old. It was presented the first time in 2001, in January, so it's a good time, 10 years, to make a little thinking about what's happened with country risk in these days. So in the next slide, yes, you see our, it's a slide we show every year. So you see in red the world growth, and just I want to mention that we calculate world growth a little differently than Claudia. We take market exchange rates. I think she took PPP, so this is why our world growth is a little lower than hers, but what's important is the trend. And you see, so in red, the world growth, and you see the line is our world payment default from all over the world, all the non-payments we receive from all the corporates. And of course, you see that thank God there are credit insurers, because you see that every 5 to 6 years, you have a peak of non-payment, a peak of bankruptcies. And you see that it's clearly linked to a drop in world growth. And of course, you see that the latest crisis was the worst for us. We've never seen that in our history in Coface. We've never seen that level of bankruptcy in the world. And of course, Spain was not the least affected of all countries. And you see, of course, that's linked to a shock in world growth that we've never experienced before. For the first time, we had a recession at the global level. You see that happening in 2009. But you also see the good news is that, of course, you don't see that really clearly in the graph, but starting with mid-2009, these non-payments start to decrease very sharply. And now in 2010, we are at a very, very low level of non-payments. Of course, it has to do with the fact that we've done our homework in terms of underwriting. We've had to be much more selective in terms of the higher risks. But it also has to do with the fact that the recession stopped. And of course, once the recession stops and you've had a big shock, the companies that could survive the big shock, but they can survive even very, very small growth. So in fact, there is a selective process that's happening. And that's the way, by the way, in Spain. In Spain, even though the growth is not that great, now corporates are stronger because they have endured a terrible shock before. So in fact, and what about our forecast? You see the 2011 forecast, you see the orange bar, and you see that we still, exactly like Claudia, forecast quite decent growth, but our forecast is a little more pessimistic than hers. I saw that the deceleration of growth that she expects is 0.5, we expect 1%, so the double. So clearly we are a little more pessimistic, exactly for the same reason she gave. We are worried about the oil price, we are worried about overheating in emerging markets, we are worried about, of course, the sovereign debt, I will come back to that. We have also some additional worries, Japan, that we have revised very, very strongly our forecast for Japan. So in fact, at the end of last year, we have a lot of bad news. We are already thinking that growth would decelerate. In fact, in the first quarter, we had even more bad news. So in fact, our idea is that deceleration would be even more stronger than we expected. Yes, so if you look at the ratings, what you see is that we have some countries that are back to A1, the best rating. So these are the good countries in terms of risk. So they are back where they were before the crisis. Of course, it's great for Canada or let's say Switzerland or Norway, but I can't say they are the leader of the world economy. So these A1 country These are excellent countries in terms of corporate risks, but they are not leading the world economy. So this is good for them. Only there was one big player, which was Japan. For us, Japan has been an excellent risk in terms of corporate risk, but of course, something dramatic happened at the beginning of the year. We had to revise very, very sharply our growth. Now we are at 0.3 for Japan. And we don't expect massive non-payments in Japan, because generally Japanese corporates pay very well. Even in times of crisis, they pay in time and in due time. So it's very rare, and if they don't pay, it means bankruptcy. It's like German corporates. But nevertheless, the environment, the macroeconomic environment in Japan has changed dramatically. You will have 3 quarters of recession at least, maybe the last quarter of growth. So, of course, we had to put a negative watch. So Japan is not an A1 anymore. If you look at the big players, which is Germany or the US, you see that the trend is positive. We are in A2 positive, but we are not where we were before the crisis. We are not back to A1. So clearly the trend is that, yes, things are getting better, but in terms of risk, we are not clearly where we were before the crisis. There are still a lot of uncertainties and lots of problems in the corporate sector. I will go back to that. There are these countries where we don't know exactly where we are, if things are getting better or getting worse. I would mention UK, I would mention Italy. The first quarter in Italy has been very, very low, very bad. So we are a bit worried about the corporate risk there. And of course, there are the countries who are still in crisis. So number one, let's say the less risky is Spain. We are in A3 negative still. And of course, there are all the countries where we feel that clearly the risk we are still in credit crisis, which is Portugal, Greece, and Ireland, for obvious reasons, and I will go to back. We'll go to back after that. So what about France and Germany? So what we're saying is that things are getting better, and you see here on these charts bankruptcies, corporate bankruptcies, and you see on the left the cost of bankruptcies, meaning the overall liabilities of failed companies, and you see on the right the number of bankruptcies, and the trend is roughly the same. Things are getting much better since, let's say, end 2009, mid-2009. But you see that both in terms of values or in terms of numbers, we are not where we were before the crisis. You still have some bankruptcies. And I think it has to do with 2 aspects. The first one is that the crisis has been so serious in these countries that you still have aftermath of weakened corporates after the crisis, in fact. And the second aspect is the access to credit. You have a lot of small corporates who struggle to get credit, who have liquidity problems, and then, of course, then that can lead to bankruptcy. So clearly, the credit aspect is absolutely crucial in this area. What you see, of course, is that France is a little worse than Germany. What you see is that, in fact, in Germany, there has been a peak of bankruptcies, but a little later. Why? Because generally, the German corporate is stronger on average than a French one. But of course, if you look at the macroeconomic blow, it has been much stronger during the crisis in Germany. You know that the recession in Germany has been pretty violent, while in France, you know, it has not been that great, but not that bad, because in France we have the chance that we consume whatever happens. We buy things and we like food, we like good things. So at least it's a kind of you know, the growth never goes down, but never goes up very much, but at least it's a kind of stabilization effect. In Germany, now things are getting very well indeed. I mean, the exports are absolutely booming. And by the way, one of the key elements of the boom in Germany is export to emerging markets. It's absolutely amazing how far the German corporates have been able to reallocate their exports to. It's not the case in France. France is not doing bad. The first quarter has been okay, but again, not that great. So you still have an amount of fragility in the corporate sector in France, which is, of course, one of the structural characteristics of the French small corporates have low capital base, and that's an issue. Now, if you look at the US, it's exactly the same, but a little worse, because generally in the US, when you have a problem, you have a lot of bankruptcies, because the legal system also helps that the corporates will go very, very far in protection. You have the Chapter 11 things, which doesn't exist in Europe. So you see that when we had the blow, of course, the term of number of bankruptcies, it goes up, you know, from 100 to 260. It's an index, but it means that it more than doubled. And now, of course, you see that in terms of number of bankruptcies, it decreases, but it doesn't decrease that much. You still have a lot of problem of bankruptcies, a lot of fragility in the US. What's happening in the US now, I know that you know that there are a lot of worries about the US economy these days. I think we don't have to worry so much, in a way. Of course, there is the risk of double dip. It talks about the possibility of, I don't think it will happen. What is happening now is a normalization of the US growth. and I think it had to be expected before. I think there was an illusion at the beginning, at the end of last year, that the US would go back where it was before. It cannot go with the kind of growth the US had before. In fact, if you look at the last 30 years, the US had a growth differential with Europe of 1%, a 1% bonus compared to Germany. And this 1% bonus was linked to consumption. Consumption has been very dynamic. Why? Because the US consumer has a lot of debt. And in a way, the party is over. Now the US consumer has to deleverage, and of course with the real estate sector, which is in such a shape that the wealth effect is very strong. And now you are back to where the reality of the US economy, that it cannot grow at 3 and so percent. The potential growth of the US has been much lower. It's around 2, 2.3, 2.5, and this is where it's going. So the problem is that the kind of growth that the US will have is the kind of growth we've had in Europe for a long time, not in Spain, but let's say in France or in Germany, where it's not that great growth, but it's not that very, very low growth. I don't think the US are doomed to go in recession. But still, there is a drag on consumption that will lead the US to I think, lower growth in the future. So I think we have to take that into account, that in a way there has been a break in the US regime of growth now, and we are now feeling this new regime of growth in the US.